This task class 5 will see us use the input tag, which is a very interesting tag in the sense that we can have different forms of it. And in this case, we will use the input tag for type text. So we're going to add to our code another div. Remember, we said a div is really to split things up. And then we're going to have this thing called a span and an end span. And within the span, we're going to have a label. The span, don't worry too much about span at the moment. It's just another tag, and it'll allow us to do certain things later on with CSS. So let's add in the first part. We do that just above the end form. And I'm adding some spaces in just so as we can see. So div, end div, span, end span, and label, end label. And this is our text within the label. So this label is an element. And we'll talk a little bit about this part in a few minutes. So now we will add another div, but this time we're going to put a BR here. And a BR is a line break. So a line break before the div, and then we have a span, and the span will be where we will put inside it our input, which we will again explain. So just after that and before the end form, we add in our input. Remember, if you have the format, you can format your document. So if we save our file, automatically saved, and we look in our browser and do a refresh, we can see that this part is the label, and this part is the input control, and this is where I can type in text, because we said that it was going to be an input text. So it's beginning to come together now. We're beginning to put controls into our form. So the span HTML element is a generic inline container for phrasing content. So it's just another way in which we want to break our code up, like our div, like our paragraph, etc. It can be used to group elements for styling purposes. So whenever we come to do this, we can use a color, or we can do an image or whatever at a particular part. So we need to really identify it. So the span is one way in which we can say, well, okay, I want to put something at that particular part using an ID or an attribute, which we will talk about. It should be used only when no other semantic element is appropriate. So don't use span if you can use BR or paragraph or head or whatever else it happens to be. Span is very much like a div element, but a div is a block level element, whereas a span is an inline element. So it's in this particular part that we're trying to use it. The label element represents a caption for an item. So we had the label before the control. Associating a label with a form control, such as an input, offers some advantages. So we want to associate the label with a particular control. The label text is not only visually associated with its corresponding text input, it is programmatically associated with it too. A screen reader will read out the label when the user is focused on the form input, making it easier for an assistive technology user to understand what data should be entered. So there's a correspondence between our label and our control. When a user clicks or touches or taps on a label, the browser passes the focus to its associated input. Going back to our browser, if I take like this text and then click on the label, you can see that the box highlights, that is the control, and we can type in our text. And that's why we have a label and a label for. So when a user clicks or touches the label, the browser then sets the focus. So how do we do that? Well, to explicitly associate a label element with an input, we need to add an ID attribute to the input element and add the for attribute to the label. So if we look here, we have label and for, and the name of this is vehicle registration. But we also have down here an ID, which is vehicle registration. We also have a name of vehicle registration. Now, if I change this vehicle registration to vehicle registration numbers, then this is being associated with the name. If I take that out and put numbers in here, then we'll be saying that this for is associated with that. But is the for associating itself with the name, or should it be associated with the name or with the ID? Well, what we say in here is that we need an ID attribute. So it's the ID attribute which we're worried about. So we can also include the input type within a label. So alternatively, we can nest the input directly inside the label, in which case the for and ID attributes are not needed because the association is implicit. So in our example, we have the for associating itself with the ID of vehicle registration number. So these two are matching. It's nothing to do with this name. But we could nest the two things, as we've said. We could put the input within the label, in which case we don't need the for and we don't need the ID. But this is a better way for us to do it at the moment. The input HTML element is used to create interactive controls for web-based forms. So the input, in our case, was a text box, and it allowed people to type stuff into it. But we will use different ones like a number later on. So there are a wide variety of input types available. The input element is one of the most powerful and complex in all of the HTML due to the sheer number of combinations. So there are a lot, but we will stick to just a few. The one we have used is text. Line breaks are automatically removed from the input value, so there will be no line breaks within it. Our input HTML element has an ID attribute, which we have called vehicle registration number, and that ID should be unique. An ID is unique. We also have a name element, but that name element does not have to be unique on the web page. So an ID element is a unique field, whereas a name field does not have to be unique. And the ID is associated with the for of the associated label. So the label and the input go together and they are connected using the for and the ID.